I know that there are a lot of different bassoon books and resources and materials out there, and it's hard to know what's helpful and what you should buy and what you should focus your time on. And that's the point of this video. If you're learning the bassoon, whether you're a beginner or a very advanced player many years into playing, there is one book, one resource that I recommend purchasing. If you're only going to purchase one, this is the one to get. Julius Weizenborn, Method for Bassoon. You can see that I really use this book because it's coming apart and has been really well loved. Julius Weizenborn was a renowned German bassoonist and made a lot of great contributions to the world of bassoon. And arguably the most important contribution he has made to the bassoon world is his Method for Bassoon, which pulls from multiple different studies that he wrote during his time. The original bassoon method that he wrote was published in 1887. There have been numerous editions that have revised and edited the Weizenborn bassoon method. There's multiple different editions out there. The one that I grew up on, because the one that I use now didn't exist, is this Bettany edition. And this was a great resource for me and had a lot of great things in the book. I would say the way that it is laid out is not always friendly, particularly to more beginner and early intermediate players, and even more advanced players. There's some things that could be laid out a little bit differently. But in 2019, Frank Morelli published his edition of the Weizenborn that looks like this. I started using it with my students in the last couple of years, and I really love it. I think out of all the Weizenborn editions that I have been familiar with, it's the clearest, most sequential way of organizing the Weizenborn method, and he's put in a lot of extra material information in there that sort of fills in the gap. That is the issue that I've had with some previous editions, is that there are just gaps and you're kind of expected to make the leap on your own. And if you don't have a teacher who's kind of like filling in those gaps for you, it can be really hard to navigate that. I really think that, if you're not studying with a private teacher, that you can work through Morelli's edition of the Weizenborn method and learn a lot. Sure, there's going to be questions that always come up, but it's about as sequential as you can get. So I'm not only going to tell you why I like the Weizenborn method and why you should get it, but I'm also going to suggest how you work through the book and some strategies to get the most out of it. One thing that I particularly like about the Morelli edition is that, especially in the very beginning, if you're a brand new beginner, he's really filled in some gaps that were missing in previous editions. He's put in some extra exercises and he's ordered things in a way that are a little bit easier to understand. In the very first lesson of the book, you're just adding one new kind of concept or one new thing as you go along, which is really helpful because you're just in the beginning, you're trying to learn so many things that you can't be overwhelmed with too much information. And I think he does a good job of introducing concepts and adding, some text explanations to help understand what's going on. There are some really great resources in the back of the book. There's a fingering chart, there's a trill fingering chart. He offers multiple different options, which is really helpful to know because there's certain situations where you have to use alternate fingerings, and it's nice to have that all in one fingering chart. Now, if you're not working out of this edition of the Weizenborn and you need a fingering chart, I do have one available online. There's a link down to it below. You just enter your email and I'll send you a PDF, and these are the fingerings that I personally use, my standard go-to fingerings. This book also includes the 50 advanced studies that Weizenborn wrote, which is a set of advanced etudes. I'd say advanced high school students, college students, or folks who've been playing bassoon for a while. One of the first etude sequences that I recommend you go through, and it's nice that it's already included in this book. In this one book, you really get a lot of bang for your buck. If you're a beginner bassoonist, you know that you're going to have material to work through years in the future. And if you're an advanced bassoonist, I guarantee there's material in here that you can work through. I think I've played almost all of both the melody, scale, and chord studies and the 50 advanced studies, and I still go back and review things and remember how difficult it was to play certain things. So let's talk about how to work through the book. My recommendation of how to get the most out of it. If you're a brand new beginner, if you've never played bassoon before, start right at the very beginning. That is the most obvious spot. Right on lesson 1. In this edition, it's on page 32. So start on page 32 and just work line by line and read any of the text explanations that go along with the music, so you can understand like what's being added every time. I'd say the most difficult thing if you're a beginner, if you don't have a lot of prior music experience, maybe on a different instrument, the toughest thing is probably going to be reading the different time signatures and rhythms. One thing that, as a teacher, that I love and sort of hate about the Weissenborn method is that he throws you into some really interesting time signatures and rhythms pretty early on in the book. It's really common to see 4/2 time, 6/4 time, 9/8, 12/8 time, and in a lot of other method books, they don't really introduce those until well into the book. I think in some ways it's good to be exposed to those things early on because they occur in music, and the way that you approach the time signature is the same no matter what. It's all just math and how you're dividing each of the measures up. So I think it is helpful, but it does create a little bit of a hurdle that you have to get over if you don't have any prior music experience. If bassoon is like your first instrument, or you played piano 30 years ago and you're coming back to it, you might need a little bit of refresher. One of the things that I love about the Weissenborn is the student-teacher duets. And previous editions of the Weissenborn use the student-teacher duets. There's usually 1 or 2 at the end of every lesson, and they're a lot of fun to play, especially if you're taking in-person lessons. Morelli has added a number of other duets, bonus duets that Weissenborn didn't originally include, and a lot of them are recognizable melodies that you already know how they go. Later on, there's some duets that are pulled directly out of famous orchestral excerpts. So that can be really helpful if you ever plan on playing in an orchestra, being familiar with those early on. So if you get an opportunity to play some of these duets with a teacher or even with a friend who's maybe a little bit better than you, when I was learning bassoon, I always felt like it was so helpful to play with my teacher because I would just hear so many things that I wasn't yet doing in my playing, and it would just illuminate a lot of things for me. So I really recommend, if you can, try to play the duets with somebody. I'll link up to one that I did out of the Weissenborn that I played both the student and the teacher parts at different speeds, so you can switch back and forth depending on your level. If you're an intermediate bassoonist, maybe you've played for a couple years or you're coming back to the bassoon after a long time off, you might want to start at a little bit later lesson in the book. You might consider starting around lesson 7, 8, or 9 of the book and seeing, is this really difficult for me? Is this really easy? And going from there and then working sequentially. Usually when I'm working with a new student, I'll kind of listen to your range and your music reading ability, and do we need to take some time to work on some fundamentals? In that case, we might want the music to be a little bit easier, so I have you start a little bit earlier. So in this edition of the Weissenborn, there are 28 lessons in the first part of the book that are pretty sequential and build off of each other. Once you get through those 28 lessons and you feel like you are ready to move on, I'd recommend going to the 50 advanced studies. And again, I would go sequentially to start, because the earlier etudes, certainly the first, 10 or so, are definitely on the shorter and more manageable side. And then they get a little bit more tricky as you go on. It's not, the advanced etudes aren't quite as sequential as like the lessons in the book, but definitely if you've never played them before, start at number 1 and move sequentially, and then you can kind of skip around from there. I'd also recommend concurrently, if you're working in the 50 advanced studies, also check out the Mildy scale and chord studies, because those studies, as the name implies, are more about scales and chords, or arpeggios, and it works through all the different major and minor keys, and that can be a great way to just build your technique in different ways. They're very pattern oriented and repetitive, but it's just about building technical fluency. So if you want to get your fingers moving, the Mildy scale and chord studies is a great way to go. The 50 advanced studies can also be good for finger technique, but they're also good for building general musicality. I mean, you have to think about phrasing and dynamics and all of the things that make a good piece of music, and that's what's nice about those ones as well. And there's many other great features about this book as well. well. There are different supplemental daily exercises you can do. You can read through all major and minor scales. There's honestly probably some features of this edition that I haven't yet discovered because, like I said, I only started using it a couple years ago with my students, and I feel like every year I'm learning something new about it, like, oh, I didn't know he had this part. So if you'd like to purchase this edition of the Weissenborn, there's a link down in the video description. And if you find yourself working through the Weissenborn method and you are a little bit confused about where you should start, or something's not making sense, or you feel like you're stuck, that is a great time to get a lesson with a teacher. I'd be happy to work with you in either a 30-minute or 60-minute Zoom lesson online, scheduled at your convenience. And we can work on where you should be starting on the Weissenborn and what you should be focusing on. I'll drop a link down below about where you can purchase lessons with me, and you're welcome to reach out with any questions about that as well. I hope this video was helpful for you in deciding what book you should buy if you're only going to buy one thing for the bassoon, and helping you understand how to work through the Weissenborn method. And there's a lot of material in this book, way more than what I could possibly go through in one video. So if you're curious about a particular section or want to know what you should do in a certain situation, maybe I could do a deep dive into a certain part of the book on a future video if you're interested in that. I'd love if you give me a thumbs up, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.